You've heard this argument 1,000 times. You kids have it easy. No, you destroyed everything. When I was your age, we worked hard. Yeah, and bought houses for the price of a used car. Every generation is convinced the next one is weaker, lazier, more entitled. And every younger generation is convinced the one before it rigged the system and walked away with the rewards. But here's the real question no one asks. If every generation thinks this, how can they all be right? Because this tension didn't start with social media, it didn't start with smartphones, and it definitely didn't start with TikTok. People have been complaining about kids these days for literally thousands of years. Ancient Greek philosophers wrote about how young people were lazy, disrespectful, and obsessed with entertainment. Roman elders complained that the next generation had no discipline and no values. So clearly this isn't new. What is new is how intense it feels. It doesn't feel like disagreement anymore. It feels like open warfare. Boomers versus millennials, Gen X versus Gen Z, everyone blaming everyone else for the state of the world. So why does it feel worse now than ever before? To understand that, you need to understand something most people get wrong. Generations were never meant to be identities. For most of human history, generations simply meant parents, children, and grandparents. You weren't a label. You weren't a demographic. You weren't a personality type. That changed in the 20th century. As technology accelerated, wars reshaped entire societies, and life began changing faster than culture could adapt. Researchers noticed something strange. People born around the same time were reacting to the world in similar ways. Same fears, same opportunities, same trauma. And suddenly, generations weren't just family markers anymore. They became social categories. The first generation to be really defined this way was born at the start of the 1900s, the greatest generation. They didn't call themselves that. History did. They were born into a world full of optimism and watched it collapse almost immediately. World War I, the Spanish flu, the Great Depression. By the time many of them were adults, survival wasn't a philosophy, it was daily life. Scarcity shaped their values, hardship shaped their discipline, and complaining wasn't an option because it didn't change anything. Then came World War II. Most of them were of fighting age. They were drafted, shipped overseas, and thrown into the largest conflict humanity had ever seen. Millions didn't come back. Those who did returned to destroyed economies, rebuilt them, and created the modern world almost from scratch. That's why they're remembered as resilient, stoic, and disciplined. Not because they were better people, but because the world demanded it. Their children grew up in a very different reality, the silent generation. Born between economic collapse and global war, they learned one lesson early: keep your head down. Speaking out wasn't brave, it was risky. Standing out wasn't encouraged, it was dangerous. They grew up during rationing, Cold War paranoia, and political witch hunts. Questioning authority could cost you your job, your reputation, or worse. So they focused on stability, hard work, loyalty, collectivism. They didn't scream for attention. They quietly built institutions that would later be challenged by their children. And those children would change everything. The baby boomers. Born after World War II, they entered a world overflowing with opportunity. The economy was booming, jobs were plentiful, college was affordable, homes were within reach. For the first time in modern history, a massive generation grew up believing progress was inevitable, and for a while, it was. They watched humanity land on the moon. They experienced unprecedented economic growth. They challenged racism, protested wars, and pushed cultural boundaries. But they also grew up with constant fear. Nuclear drills, political assassinations, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, while they pushed for freedom, they also learned anxiety. That contradiction shaped them. They wanted change, but also security. They wanted progress, but on their terms. And as they aged, many of them became the very establishment they once rebelled against. Which brings us to the generation caught right in the middle, Generation X. Born into a world where trust in institutions was collapsing. They watched divorces skyrocket. They watched corporations abandon loyalty. They watched governments lie. They became latchkey kids, raised by television, music, and the quiet understanding that no one was coming to save them. This generation learned skepticism early. They didn't believe promises. They didn't trust authority. They adapted instead. They didn't expect the system to work. They learned how to survive inside it. And then history hit fast forward. The internet arrived, technology exploded, and a new generation was born right in the middle of the transition. Millennials. Millennials were born at the exact moment the world promised too much. They grew up being told a simple story. Go to school, get good grades, go to college, work hard, and everything will work out. And for a short while, it looked like that story might actually be true. They were kids in the 1990s, a decade filled with optimism. The Cold War was ending. Technology felt exciting instead of threatening. The internet wasn't addictive yet. It was magical. The future looked open. Then adulthood arrived. The year 2000 came with political chaos. Then 9/11 shattered the sense of safety. Then came endless wars that never seemed to end. And finally, the 2008 financial crisis wiped out careers before they even started. Suddenly, the rules changed. Degrees stopped guaranteeing jobs. Hard work stopped guaranteeing stability. Housing prices exploded, wages froze, debt followed them everywhere. Millennials didn't just experience economic pressure, they experienced betrayal. They did what they were told and the reward never came. So they adapted. They delayed marriage, they delayed kids, they delayed home ownership, they questioned traditional success. To older generations, this looked like laziness or entitlement, but to millennials, it felt like math. You can't buy a house if the numbers don't add up. You can't commit to a system that clearly doesn't work. This is why millennials talk so much about mental health, burnout, and purpose. It's not weakness, it's the result of realizing the old script was broken. And while millennials were still trying to fix the system from the inside, a new generation was already growing up without any illusions left. Generation Z. Gen Z never believed the promises in the first place. They didn't watch the internet being born, they were born into it. They didn't experience life before algorithms. Algorithms shaped their reality from day one. Social media didn't just entertain them, it watched them, measured them, compared them. They grew up with a front-row seat to everything going wrong. School shootings streamed in real time, climate collapse discussed daily, political extremes amplified constantly, a global pandemic shutting the world down during their formative years. Stability wasn't something they lost, it was something they never expected. So, Gen Z adapted faster than any generation before them. They became hyper-aware, hyper-online, hyper-critical. They don't trust institutions because they've never seen them function properly. They don't respect authority automatically because authority hasn't earned it. They don't believe in long careers because they've watched adults burn out and get replaced. To older generations, Gen Z seems angry, fragile, or extreme, but from Gen Z's perspective, they're just responding honestly to reality. If the house is on fire, you don't politely ask who forgot to turn off the stove. You demand answers. And this is where the generational conflict becomes explosive. Older generations see Gen Z as reckless and disrespectful. Gen Z sees older generations as complacent and irresponsible. Both are reacting to the same collapse, just from different angles. But the story doesn't end there. Because while everyone is busy arguing about millennials and Gen Z, another generation is quietly growing up in an even stranger world. Generation Alpha. These are kids who never knew life without smartphones, never knew boredom without a screen, never knew information that wasn't instant. To them, AI isn't futuristic, it's normal. Many adults are already calling them the worst generation yet. Too distracted, too impatient, too dependent on technology. But here's the pattern no one wants to admit. Every generation says this about the next one. The greatest generation thought boomers were soft. Boomers thought Gen X was lazy and cynical. Gen X thought millennials were entitled. Millennials thought Gen Z was extreme. And now everyone is already judging Gen Alpha. So maybe the problem isn't the kids. Maybe it's the speed of change. For most of human history, the world changed slowly enough for values to transfer naturally from one generation to the next. That's no longer true. Technology now evolves faster than culture. Economies change faster than education systems. Social rules shift faster than humans can emotionally adapt. Each generation is forced to relearn how to survive from scratch, and that creates friction. The greatest generation survived scarcity. Boomers surfed expansion. Gen X learned distrust. Millennials learned disappointment. Gen Z learned exposure. Gen Alpha is learning acceleration. So when people ask, which generation is the worst, they're asking the wrong question. The real question is this: which generation had to adapt the fastest to a world they didn't choose? Because that generation will always look broken to the ones before it. But broken doesn't mean useless, and different doesn't mean worse. In fact, the generation that looks the most chaotic is usually the one forced to change things the most. And maybe, years from now, another generation will look back at all of this and say the same thing humans have always said: those people ruined everything. If you want to know where you fit in this story, comment your generation below. And if you think one generation truly deserves the blame, say which one. Because this argument is never going away. It never has.